Well, welcome everyone to the first professional development webinar of 2016. I'm very happy today to introduce Ann Strike with us today. Anna is an associate professor of practice here in the Department of Agronomy and Horticulture and is also responsible for the recruitment efforts of this department. And on top of all of that, and probably more, she is also the superintendent for the Nursery Landscape career development event that takes place during State FFA convention for our students. And so with that, I've asked Ann to share with us some of the best practices, give us an overview of the event, and in particular, give us some insight into the new component that started last year called Design in a Box. And so with that, Ann, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks for coming today. I think we'll just go ahead and start the PowerPoint.
Okay.
So I just wanted to kind of go over the 4 aspects of the contest. So we have 4 parts associated with the contest.
Feel free to just hit space bar. Yeah.
Where's my home?
Oh, I'm sorry. Got you right in the middle of it. There we go.
All right, so the 4 parts of the contest would be the general knowledge, the landscape calculations, plant ID, and the design in the box. I'll spend a little bit of time on all those today just because I think that there's some benefit for going over all those aspects. So with the general knowledge portion, we have 25 questions, so 50 total points. And those questions come from 6 different publications. And so those publications are on the website. If you go to the contest website, we can bring that up later, but you'll see links to those 6 publications. One of the things I want to make you aware of, I put this Bloom's taxonomy on the right-hand side. I'm guessing as teachers, you've probably seen this several times. But what I want to make known is I don't just have them remember facts. And so remembering facts is the lowest level of learning, basically just memorizing things, spitting it back out. I want them to understand what they're doing and apply what they're doing. So I'm looking at probably those 3 base areas for developing other questions in the general knowledge portion of the contest. So what I want to do is I want to run through just a few examples. So I pulled a couple of questions from last year and made a couple of new questions as well, just so you kind of get a feel of where some of these questions will be. So based on the key, so one of the publications talks about keying plants. And so if we're looking at a landscape, since it's a nursery and landscape contest, we're really talking about how to manage a landscape. And in order to do that the right way, you need to understand what plant you're dealing with. And so that really comes into play if you're looking at how to control a pest on this particular plant. The first thing I always ask people, well, what kind of plant do you have? Okay, because if they tell me they have a certain type of plant, say Kentucky bluegrass, because I'm a turf person, I'm going to say, well, it's June. What do the symptoms look like? And more times than not, it might be dollar spot or it might be summer patch. So understanding what plant you have is going to give you a pretty good idea of what potential pest problems you have. On the same side, if you take a look at the specific types of plants, knowing what plant it is, it's going to be easier to make management recommendations. So when do I prune? When should I fertilize? Those are very dependent on the type of plant material that you have, and being very specific with the idea of that individual plant. So we could take it a broad aspect, and we could look, if we're looking at like weed control in a turf area, knowing that it's Kentucky bluegrass is going to be pretty helpful. But then looking at the type of weed, if I'm going to try to identify and control a weed, I need to know, is it a perennial, annual, or biennial? And so plant ID is really important. And so that's why using a key is, having a basic knowledge of keys is fairly important. And plus it's going to help them in the identification portion of the contest as well, if they've looked at these and understand them. And so this is one of the questions that I actually had on it last year. So based on the key and the images below, what plant is this? If you know your plants pretty well, you could probably just say, okay, this is a flowering dogwood. The bud is pretty obvious. The leaf venation is pretty obvious. That's a dogwood. If you look at the key, flowering dogwood is the only one that's on there. But still walking through there, understanding what palmately lobed means, understanding what not being lobed is. So understanding the terminology associated or within that key is pretty important.
Oh, I probably need to click back on. There you go.
Okay, another example. In that same plant ID publication that I have, we have a lot of terms that are associated with plant identification, and so nodes. And so rather than just saying what is a node, we can say, okay, how many nodes does this stem have? And so it would be very easy for the student to count the number of nodes. If you look at this particular image right here, a node is a place where a stem or bud is located. That would be the definition. And so we would have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so in my answers, I would definitely have 6, but then I wouldn't have 5 or 7 just in case they might want to say, well, there's something on the backside here. So I'd make it very obvious that's the correct answer. I'm not out to fool them. I want them to get the right answers. And so I'm not going to put anything that's really close to the correct answer.
Just click on the picture. Right?
Okay.
Yep,
another example is, taking a look at the plants. The terminology goes back to understanding, knowing what the plant is to understand how to manage it. And so the designation pendula represents what part of the scientific name. That would be a very a question that might be on there. Again, now looking at the soil triangle, that's another publication. So I'm trying to take something from that publication and where they could actually apply what they know, how to use this. And so if you have a soil 25% clay, 65% sand, and 10% silt, this would require them to understand how to use a soil triangle, textural triangle. So you'd end up with this silty clay loam soil. So any questions on that first part, so the general knowledge portion of the contest?
Do students do this all on paper, or are they filling the bubble sheets, or what's
So we've done it, we've done a couple different ways. We've used bubble sheets, we've used just fill it in on the sheet. Last year we actually did it online, and I think we'll do it again online this year. So they'll go into the computer lab and submit their answers via Kia.
Okay.
So, any questions about that part? Okay, the next part is the landscape calculations. This again is 25 questions, 2 points per question for a total of 50 points. These are the calculations that you would see if you're a landscape manager, if you're a turf manager, if you're working in a greenhouse. Basic calculations and conversions. So I'm just looking at area and volume, looking at pure live seed, how many pavers, how many plants would fit in a specific area, and then fertility questions as well. So those really form the basis of this area. So again, some sample questions that I've used in the past. So you wish to mulch your existing flower beds with 2 inches of material. You have 1,250 square feet of flower beds on your property. How many cubic yards of mulch will you need? This requires students to make a conversion. So how many feet is, convert inches to feet, 2 inches to feet, so it'd be like 0.167 feet. Take that times the 1,250, so you get cubic feet of mulch, and then you need to change that into cubic yards. So it's just a simple conversion of dividing by 27. So in this area, I just want them to kind of start conceptualizing how much is really needed to mulch an area, how much material do you actually need within a basic home landscape to run a business. So a lot of our students that go through our programs, they're very entrepreneurial, and so they need to understand this calculation aspect is pretty important for them to make money as they have their own business. So then I just had some more questions. How much fertilizer is needed to apply? Do you guys want me to walk through and tell you how to solve these, or you guys have a pretty good idea of how to solve these?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the answer on that? Sorry, we had the video off so we could see the slides.
Are you guys all right with these types of calculations? Yeah. Okay. So I just kind of want to give you an idea of what they're seeing, because really, to be honest, last year I looked at the averages for the different areas within the contest, and the first 2 areas, so the general knowledge and the landscape calculations, average was 44. for both areas.
Percent.
44%. So obviously they're not doing well, and so I'm not sure if if they just haven't seen some of the examples or where that problem's coming.
Are there some example problems on the rules site for the nursery landscape event, or is that really up to the teacher?
It's really up to the teacher.
Okay.
I mean, I could put some on there if you want me to, but in the past I've just given them what would be on there. So yeah, go ahead.
Do they just have to know the conversion factors for yards and feet and inches and all that?
I've actually, on the top of it, I've put a lot of conversions. I don't believe I included 27 cubic feet is one cubic yard. That's something that I think that they probably should know. But I did put other conversions on there.
Okay.
So just some more examples. Looked at pure live seed. We looked at plugging. So figuring out how many plugs you need, whether it's buffalo grass plugs, or if you're looking at perennial or annual flowers, how many of those flowers do you need to fill a landscape bed? So questions about that area? What kind of questions? Are you guys going over this in class? What areas are they struggling in? Are the students struggling in?
With mine, it's always the ID, you know, compared to floriculture where you mainly look at flowers, you know, they get frustrated with the you know, the trees and the shrubs and stuff like that, especially things that don't flower.
Right. Well, yeah. What about the calculations? Are you guys seeing any trends where they're struggling with a particular type of question?
Usually the ones that they have to convert something.
Okay.
Mine always miss that, you know, when you go, like you had in yours, the 2 inches. That's one that my kids will always miss, is they'll keep it in feet and they'll have this gigantic number.
Right.
Rather than converting that down to 1/6 or whatever.
So is there something that I can do that could help them out?
I wonder if we could maybe, I assume that there's categories of questions. Like you always ask a multiple question, you always ask a planting question, like was on this slide here, the buffalo grass question. And that I wonder, would it give too much away from your perspective if we were to have one example of some different categories of questions?
I could definitely do that. That would give away a lot of the questions, because the questions that I'm asking are very simple area volume conversion.
Yeah.
I'm not asking them to convert to active ingredient for pesticides. I'm staying with a very simple thing. So what it would do is it would force them to look at, or hopefully force them to look at it. And then if they could replicate that, they do very well.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's a knowledge gain or not.
Right.
So.
Well, your students will have access to this as well. We don't have to protect it or things. And so I guess these are probably the categories of questions that we're talking about.
So let's go to plant identification. So we have 50 samples or images. They walk around the room, and the sheets with all the plant names and all the equipment names are given to the students. So they have a list. They can look at that list and they say, oh, yep, this is the plant that it is, and put that one down. As far as the samples, it kind of depends on the year. Last year we had a very early spring, so I was able to go outside and get some flowers, get some twigs, get some leaves. And so I prefer to use live plant material versus having images, just because people are going to be working with live plant material. So I think that they should understand how to identify that. And I don't expect them to understand how to identify by buds, because that takes a lot more skill. But I will give them the most obvious keys to identifying that plant. So if the plant is, the flowering dogwood, you know, if that was flowering, I could give them a flower. I could give them a bud. I could potentially find a fruit from the last year. And so I'm going to try to give them as much as possible. I will say that I might have 1 or 2 that are used to separate students. That might be a little bit more difficult, but I'm not going to try to fool them, okay? So this one is they walk around the room. I have the items sitting on tables. They can walk around, certain number of time available to them, 30 minutes available to them. They can walk around, take a look at the samples. Like I said, I have all the plants and all the items, all the equipment listed on the sheet, and they just put me to put the number down for that particular item. And the plant list and the equipment list is online as well.
Is that the same one that you've had for the past few years?
I changed last year. So last year was the first year that we included the equipment. And so we have, I believe, about 25 pieces of equipment on there as well.
So the plant identification happens simultaneously with the equipment.
It does, yes.
So what are, for those of us that haven't looked at the list, what are some examples of equipment that you would?
I gotta get to the website.
Oh, you might have
That's
to look
cool.
at our link again. Let's go to that tab there, and it's and
There's those 6 publications used for the general knowledge exam, and then here's our list right here.
we might have to update our link there. They changed a bunch of things on the website. So
I got it pulled up right here.
did it
So
work for you?
Yeah, it worked for me on my iPad.
Yeah, so it's oh gosh, like a flat nose shovel, a rototiller, a hoe, pruning shears, loppers. So it's basic equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just click back.
So then the design in the box. So this is kind of the area that you guys are probably most interested in. We put this in last year, team activity. We wanted to have some aspect to the team because previously everything was individual. And so what we're doing with this is they're developing a landscape that has desirable characteristics that I've outlined. And so I guess I should back up. We've used this with our students, high school students come in for different events. We've used it with master gardeners, and it seems to work pretty well. One of the things that we find with students that aren't used to landscape design is they don't understand the plan view very well. So plan view is when you're looking down on a landscape like from above, and they just can't envision what that landscape may look like as they're walking through it. And so this is another way that we can help students envision what that landscape might look like and point out areas that maybe need to be improved upon, because they may look great when you draw it in plan view, but when you actually put the plants in there, you'll notice that there's potentially a lot of space underneath trees that are just bare. It just doesn't look quite right. And so this is just kind of a nice way to have a 3D rendition or 3D example of what a potential landscape may look like. And so what we do is we base a lot of stuff. Well, landscape design has different principles that are universal. And so we developed a 4-H curriculum. Myself, Kim Pat, and Steve Rohde, we developed a 4-H curriculum that was targeted towards high school students, that they could go through this curriculum and have a pretty good idea of what landscape design is all about. And so that's where that link is right there. We can take a look at that a little bit later. But what we wanted to do is have students kind of work through the process without specifically naming plants, but kind of stopping at the preliminary design area where you're talking about plants and reasons why they're used in the landscape. So we'll kind of go through that right here. So this is a preliminary design, and I realize it's small, but what you'll notice, it looks like it's almost a finished landscape. But what you'll notice on here is that we don't name specific plants in here. We don't say this is a red oak, this is goldenrod, this is sedum. What we do in here is we put the reason why we put that plant in that area. And then in the final step, we start to name the plants. And so when you think about design, a lot of people go about it the wrong way. A lot of people go to a nursery and they say, oh gosh, this is a beautiful plant. I'm gonna buy this plant. They take that plant home and they have to find some place to put it into their landscape. When in reality, you should think about your existing landscape and say, what do I need to improve? What can I add to this landscape to make sure that everything fits and it works, aesthetically pleasing, but still functional. And so this is a much larger landscape than what we're dealing with in design in a box, but you can still take the idea and translate it to the design in the box. So you'll notice that, for example, like in this area, we have 3 low suckering shrubs. They're drought tolerant, they're hardy. So we're basically giving reasons or what we want to see in that particular area of that landscape. And that's kind of what we're doing in the design in the box. And so I know this is small, but this is the grade sheet that I used last year. And in the boldface, you can see the kind of categories that I told students they needed to address. And so those may change this year. But basically I said that it needs to be a creative landscape. It needs to be inviting for people. You must have enclosure somewhere, whether that's overhead enclosure, whether that's side enclosure, just some type of closure, partial enclosure. You need to identify where that's going to be. We need to have the microclimate modified appropriately. So identifying where north is a good way to start. And then once you know where that is, then you can say, okay, I'm going to modify this landscape. I'm going to provide shade to this area that I'm going to maybe have a bench or a lawn chair at, where I may enjoy that landscape. Or I want to stop this wind. Maybe it's a site that's open on top of a hill where you have a lot of wind coming through during the winter. So I want to have an evergreen windbreak there. And so kind of thinking about your landscape in the box and first determining what direction is north. That's going to help you kind of start thinking about your landscape. I also requested that I have one person in the landscape. That helps kind of give a scale to that landscape. They had to have two entrance or exits, and they had to have at least one hardscape element. So a lot of times, hardscape elements are really important to a landscape. You need to just add to the beauty, add to the functional landscape, and so I required to have one. If you think about your home landscape, you probably have a ton of hardscape elements, whether it's a paver or a deck, it's maybe a bird bath, it's so many different things they could use, containers. So we wanted to add one additional aspect to that landscape. So those were the bold-faced areas that I gave them as they came into the room. And so I expected them to kind of talk to their teammates and kind of come up with an idea of how they wanted to approach their design based on the materials that I had available to them. And then if you take a look at the rest of the grade sheet here, that basically just talks about the design principles. So we talk about order, unity, and rhythm. Those are really the three major ones that we talk about. But then included in there, we have scale, we have rhythm, we have balance. So I want them to really think about all that as well. We have focal points. And then I also graded them on their presentation. One of the things I noticed last year was that they were too specific. They didn't really come up with a concept, what is this landscape supposed to represent? Rather, they just came in there and they said, this is a red oak tree. It's big and it looks good here. So they didn't really give reasons why they put plants to where they put them. They just kind of arranged the different materials the way that they thought it looked nice. And so you'll see that on some of the examples that I'll show you. So this is last year. This is, I had 3 groups in there at one time. And you can see on the far table here, I had several pieces of plants, of paper clips, foil, there's all sorts of different things that they could choose from. So I allowed the groups to go up and look at the material and then go back as a group and kind of say, okay, this is what I saw, this is how I think we can use it. And then I had groups go up there and select plant material. I first had them grab like 6 pieces. And then the next group go up. I had them draw numbers to see who would go up first. And then I kind of went in a reverse snake. They could go up there 3 or 4 more times to get material as they need it. And so that's kind of the process that we used. You can see this is just another group here. I had paper, I had markers, scissors, all sorts of different things that they could use to incorporate into their design. You can see I had, we used pop boxes, and I had some black soil in there. Turned out the soil was way too wet, but it worked. But this is what some of the groups came up with. And so as I was grading these, I can kind of walk through here and tell you what I was thinking. But I asked them to explain their landscape. And so when they do that, I give them a few minutes to think about what they want to say. I expanded it to 2 minutes. They have 2 minutes to explain their design this year because 1 minute was a little tight. But I want them to walk through, on that grade sheet, you'll see that I had, tell me where north is, tell me what their design concept is. So if you remember, the design concept is maybe 5, 6, 7 words that tells me what you're trying to accomplish. So it could be this one almost looks like it's a park, so it could be a stroll through the park. It could be something very, very simple, but it basically explains what you're trying to accomplish in that landscape. You can see that I did have some flowers and stuff, so I go outside and I try to find things that are in bloom that look good at this point in time that could be used for a variety of trees and shrubs and grass and what have you. But in this one, you can see they actually molded the soil a little bit and created some elevation. I thought that was fairly creative, that they just didn't keep it flat. They had a pond that came down. They did have an issue. They have a little walkway over this pond, it looks like, totally out of scale. So think about scale as well. You see this is the person right here, and this is an arch, and the person can't even fit underneath that arch. And so they got points docked from that. But they created an enclosure. They did have some color, some year-round color. This was kind of a formal landscape, but then they said it was a formal landscape, and it really is, because you can see it's basically a reflection on each side of this walkway, but then that is kind of ruined when they threw in this pond coming through the middle right here, because that's not replicated on the other side. And so just being consistent throughout the design is something that's fairly important. Kind of another example here, they incorporated nice T-top as a pond. They had a little shelter up here. This one wasn't too bad, except for they just had one plant. And so when you talk about design, you want to have multiple layers. You don't want to have just a single plant along a walkway. It just doesn't look quite right. And so if they would have added additional material within these plants right here, that would have been all right. I have another example here. Again, looking at the design principles, you talk about massing and layering, line use. There's a lot going on here. And so sometimes they try to do too much. They did some plantings. What was good about this, they did some plantings underneath this tree, but they didn't do any massings. And so it would have been great if they had had multiple acorns representing one type of plant, multiple flowers of this type representing one type of plant, having them in masses rather than single individual plantings. Asked them to put a person in the landscape. I thought this landscape was done pretty well. The reason I thought it was done pretty well is they explained it well, but then when you look at it, it offers some protection to the person who's sitting in that landscape, because it has plants in the back. It has multiple layers, multiple plant heights, and they mask the plants all right. It would have been better if they maybe had maybe an additional sedum back here to be an odd number, maybe another Scotch pine cone behind this guy, just because those odd numbers make the landscape visually more appealing. Right now, when I look at this landscape, it's cut right in half. And then this plant is different than the holly. And so if they would have put holly back here, that would have made more of a screen. It would have been more of a continuous, and that would have been a little bit better design aspect there. Students are really creative. This is a guy. I asked them to put a person in the landscape, and they were pretty creative with what they did. This is a guy fishing. I think his head fell off, but I thought that was pretty creative as well. Any questions about that part right now?
How much time again do they have to put it together?
They have 30 minutes, actually about 25 minutes, because then within that 30 minutes, I have them present their 2 minutes to me. So it's pretty fast. So it helps if they practice. It helps if they've looked at the materials before or have a general idea of what they're going to do. Like I said, I don't give them, I give them kind of a statement of what I want to see in the landscape when they come into the room. And so they had to be creative with that aspect. So it could be a park setting, it could be a backyard setting. It's really up to them. They just need to justify what they did to me. Questions about that at all? So what I did, let me go ahead and put this on.
Yeah.
So I went ahead and I started designing the box. If you remember from those pictures, we used soil, and the soil was pretty wet. And so today I just went ahead and grabbed some vermiculite from our teaching lab, and it doesn't stick as well, but I didn't get it wet either. So I started this landscape. By no means is it finished, but you can see the lighter vermiculite makes a total difference. What I did here is I created a deck. So when a student would come up, what I would expect them to do is say, hi, my name is, introduce themselves, the schools that they're from, and then tell me what their design concept is, and then go ahead and start telling me what's north. Okay, so after I did that, I could say this is south, this is north, this would be east, and this would be west. And so that way I have a general idea of what they're looking at, because that makes a difference in shade patterns and how you're altering the microclimate. And so I would ask them to set me up that way, and then go ahead and have each student deliver a portion of what they did, and they can talk about that in their small groups. So this is just a start. By no means is this complete, because this is grass out here, and I'd probably put maybe some more plants on this backside potentially. So I'd have to come up with some green, something that would represent the green grass in this area. What I did is I actually just put this green line in here because I wanted to start my line. Lines are very important in design, and so you can see that this is my bed line right there. What I did here is also, this would be my deck, and so if I say I wanted to have some landscape amenities or hardscape, I could count this as my deck. And then I have 2 recliner chairs. I have a picnic table and some chairs around it. I have this tree right here that's a 3-stem tree that's providing shade because it's on our southwest side of our house. And so it's basically south side, providing shade for our deck. Under that, I have some ground cover. So you can see my hydrangea flowers are actually serving as some ground cover. And then we have some evergreen, small evergreen tree or shrubs that are along the front of the deck. This will provide winter interest, and it will kind of hide what's going on underneath that deck there. You can see that I have steps. I haven't folded them very well, but I have steps going up to my deck right here. This would be a fence. I could say this would be a fence, the edge of my box. Does not have to be. The students can say what they want that to be. And then if I have a focal point, I could say that my euonymus fruit is small perennial flowers that would be drawing attention maybe to this bird feeder. It's kind of hard to see that bird feeder right here. And then I have some small ornamental trees in the back that are screening what's happening from my neighbor's yard. And so you can see that I did not say anything about specific plants. I just basically said what their function was in that landscape. So, and obviously I would put some green grass down here. I don't want to keep this brown. This grass is not brown.
Could be winter.
Could be a winter. But if they told me a winter setting, that would be fine.
So what's an example of a scenario that you would have set up like for this? This is a backyard, you live in town, that type of thing?
So no, I would just say basically give me a landscape. So last year I just said give me a landscape that's creative, that's inviting for people, and space has to have enclosure. So basically those bold-faced items that I had on the grade sheet is what I told them they needed to include. And I might change those this year. It just kind of depends. I had students use backyards. I had students say this is part of a large park. I had students do this is a pond within a park. And so it just kind of depends on what the students want to do. Questions at all?
Oh, come on, guys.
Honestly, I just didn't really understand the box concept last year, so just seeing this, it makes a lot more sense now.
Okay, good.
It's literally a landscape in a box.
Yeah. So if we go back to sorry. So if you go back to that, we don't need it. If you go back to that preliminary design in the PowerPoint, it's just so tough for students to visualize to do that. And so by doing it this way, they can actually see, is this going to work? So if we would do a plan, a lot of times, so in a plan, in our design in the box, let me come back. So,
oh, to this?
right
oh,
here.
okay.
So So you're going to have these trees, and so they're going to be 3 circles, okay?
Go ahead.
So there's going to be 3 circles on a plan. And then a lot of times, because that is filled,
I'm going to show this
yeah.
here.
So basically, what we have right here, so this is what we have in our box right here. Basically, we have those. A lot of times, students will say, well, we're done with that landscape. But we could actually put plants that are underneath that tree. And so that's kind of what I have here, would be underneath the tree. So it's layered. And so layering is pretty important. So there's not that void. So if we didn't have these smaller shrubs underneath here, there would just be a large landscape bed that didn't have anything in it. But it would look fine if you looked at it from above. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's a very, very rough drawing, but you know, we have these, oh gosh, what are those? These hibiscus flowers right here. They're hard to see because of the vermiculite, but I have those tucked underneath these larger trees, and this is what it would look like in a plan drawing. You'd have those tucked underneath there, and then the flowers, the euonymus that we have in front representing the perennial flowers would be out front of that.
I'm going to move the camera over here. Sorry if a little shaky, but there's 3 different layers there if you couldn't tell. Plus then we'll just that's a bird feeder.
Yeah, so this is, yeah, right here.
Yeah. So.
So students are given plant material, just things around the house. I have given them markers. I've given them scissors. If you look at my my picnic table here, that's a wine cork cut several different times. My reclining chairs, toothpicks. I just drew my deck, and then I put lines on for the stairs. I raised it by putting corks underneath it. Last year I had pop bottle tops that they could have used for that. And then I drew I used the markers to make it look more like a deck. And they could do a lot more, but I just basically used brown on white paper to represent the wood. So I want them to be creative, so I didn't want to show too much, but they have markers available. They can draw things. They can give the grass texture. That would be nice. So just be creative.
Benjamin Holcomb, please report to the high school principal's office. Benjamin Holcomb to the high school principal's office, please.
What questions do you guys have?
The only question I had as you were going through that your PowerPoint, there was a link for like a 4-H design deal. Is that on the website on the Ag Ed page?
Yes, if we could go to that.
Yeah. For the screen again.
Yeah, so we basically we did a design series, Steve, Kim, and I, and they are for purchase, but they really talk about the design principles. If you just go down a little bit further.
It's out of the way.
So it's the 3 manuals. It has a student manual and has a teacher's manual associated with it. So in the teacher's manual, we kind of we give you the answers to the questions that we pose. And so Grow a Beautiful Space, the youth manual, for the first one, you can see what we talked about in there. So we talked about the design principles, we talked about careers in landscape design. And so that one would, like it just says, that one really focuses on the design principles. So if you don't teach that, you could use this as a reference. A lot of what I grade is based on this, but it's very typical for landscape design. The design principles are the same, no matter whether you learn it through this manual or elsewhere. The second one talks about the characteristics of plants. So it talks about the functional uses of plants, the aesthetic uses of plants, and then just the plant quality. So color, form, texture, all those things that I want students to really the first two manuals are pretty important, because those are the characteristics that I want the students to kind of talk about when they're describing their landscape. And so the perennial flowers in front, they're used because they have a good flower color that lasts from September through October. So really talks about the characteristics. And then the third manual is really the design process. And so that's where they're starting to actually draw, using the scales and using triangles, and going through the steps of doing the client interview, doing the site inventory, site analysis, coming up with different concepts, doing the preliminary drawing, and then sending that final drawing to their client.
In the cost you mentioned before for the youth manuals was?
I think it's $7.95, and then the teacher's manual is $9.95.
And are those digital copies, or are
They are.
They are. So, yeah, for a really bargain deal, 135 pages. This is just one of the student manuals here. But you could own digital PDF manuals of this, which is pretty amazing.
Lots of color pictures as well.
In
Lots
fact,
of color pictures.
let's see what's so from a looks like there's like worksheets and other things as part of that.
So we have activities for each of the areas. I think we probably have at least 10 lessons in each book, and we have activities associated with each lesson.
And currently, I don't think that's on our rules website, but we can certainly put it on there. So for you all that are on here today, probably saw on here, it's just 4h.unl.edu/4h curriculum/horticulture, and these are at the bottom of the page under landscape design projects. What's the rest of this on here?
That's for
like younger ages?
Yeah, it's younger. It's
Okay.
for a state fair type stuff.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's all I have. You guys have questions, comments? Thanks for your time today.
So I guess I'll just ask one more question.
Thank you.
And before jumping off, just to reiterate, what do you want students to bring with them when they show up?
They can bring a clipboard if they want. They really don't need it. Pencil. They really don't need a whole lot, to be honest. A calculator is fine. Basic calculator. I would prefer it not be on their phone. Just be a basic calculator.
All right.
So they don't need like a scale?
I know, because this design in the box really takes the place of that.
Okay.
And everything with this design in the box, everything's kind of relative scale. So that's why I have them put a person in. So it kind of helps me give a scale to that landscape. So basically a park bench should be smaller than a tree, but your person should be able to sit on that park bench.
So they have to create their person?
They do.
Okay.
Bless you.
Thank you.
What else, crew?
That's pretty good. Thank you for me.
Yep, same here.
Well, Ann, thanks for everything you do for this event and for also spending time today. This will be posted up online and available to all the ag teachers, so I'll let you know how many views we get too. And one thing Ann does too, I think is unique to your event, you survey students typically about what their preparation's like and that type of thing. So I'd recommend one question be, have they watched this video?
Absolutely.
So in any case, thanks guys for joining us this afternoon, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.